The box hits the floor. Heavy, dense, final. Karl Brauer does not reach for it immediately. He has learned, across 3 years of infantry service, that you do not reach for things too quickly. Not on the Eastern Front. Not where the difference between a reflex and a decision could determine whether you came home or didn't. So he waits. 1 breath. 2. Then he pulls back the brown paper. Inside, wrapped in craft paper, sits a pair of boots. He picks one up with both hands. The leather is dark. Not black, not quite brown. Somewhere between the two in the way that properly tanned hide settles into itself after the curing process. It smells of tallow and machine oil and something else. Something he has almost forgotten. The smell of material that has not been compromised. He presses his thumb hard into the sole. It does not move. Karl Brauer is 28 years old. He is a corporal in the German Wehrmacht, formerly assigned to the 71st Infantry Division, Eastern Front, and he has not felt leather this honest in longer than he can comfortably remember. He pulls on the left boot. It fits. Not approximately. Not close enough. It fits the way things fit when the person who made them was working with materials they did not have to ration. He pulls on the right boot. Same thing. He stands up slowly and looks at the room around him. It is August 25, 1943. The processing hall at Camp Edwards, Massachusetts, smells of sawdust and institutional soap. Long fluorescent lights run the full length of the ceiling, buzzing faintly, indifferent to everything happening beneath them. American staff move through the space with the particular efficiency of men who have performed the same task so many times it no longer requires thought. Forms are stamped. Names are logged. Equipment is issued across long folding tables with the quiet, steady rhythm of a production line that has no reason to stop. Karl is one of 49 German prisoners processed that morning. He had arrived the day before, by transport from the New York port facility, disembarked under overcast skies, loaded onto a bus with clean seats and windows that were not broken, driven through a landscape that looked nothing like a country at war. He had pressed his face against the glass. No Ravel. No bombed facades with their upper floors open to the sky. No women carrying that expression German women had developed, that particular flatness that comes from rationing hope the way you ration flour. Gas stations sat open at the roadside. Diners had lit signs. A boy on a bicycle rode past a grocery window that appeared to be fully stocked. He had told himself it was staged, a deliberate route, propaganda for the new arrivals. He had told himself this and almost believed it. Now, in the processing hall, he is holding a boot that cost more to produce than anything issued to frontline German soldiers in 18 months. He sets it down and looks across the room. The winter of 1941 came to the Eastern Front without mercy. That is not entirely accurate. The warning was there. Every soldier in the field could read a sky turning that particular shade of iron gray, could feel the quality of the air changing in early November, could smell the cold coming down from the northeast the way you smell rain before it arrives. The warning was there. What wasn't there were the coats. Karl's unit, 180 men at full strength, reduced by then to something closer to 140, had been moving through the frozen approaches west of Moscow when the temperature dropped past -20 Celsius and did not come back up. Operation Barbarossa had been designed for a campaign that would end in October. When October passed and the Soviet Union had not collapsed on schedule, the logistics pipeline behind the Wehrmacht's advance simply ran out of things to send. Not short. There were no winter coats in the system because no one had ordered them. The planners had assumed the campaign would be finished before winter arrived. When the assumption failed, there was nothing behind it. No reserve. No contingency. No acknowledgement that failure was even a category worth preparing for. Karl had watched men strip greatcoats from dead Red Army soldiers just to have something between their skin and the wind. And then there were the boots. The Wehrmacht's leather crisis of 1941 was not a secret at the soldier level. You cannot hide a failure from the man who is wearing it. By late autumn, leather rationing had forced German supply officers to substitute compressed fiber composites for standard boot soles. The material functioned adequately in dry conditions. In mud, in slush, in the specific punishment of a Russian November that cycled between freezing and thawing twice a day, it failed. Not gradually. Completely. Carl remembers the specific evening, 6-hour march, temperature at -15, ground that had thawed in the afternoon and refrozen by dusk into a surface like broken glass. He remembers pulling off his right boot afterward and finding the sole had partially dissolved. The leather upper was intact. The stitching was holding. Only the part that was supposed to bear contact with the earth, the part that was supposed to carry him, had crumbled away. His feet were dry. He sat in a damaged farmhouse that smelled of animals and wet wood and looked at the sole for a long time. A soldier can absorb the memory of a wound. He can place it in a category: the cost of war, the price of belonging to something larger than himself. But there is no category for disintegrating footwear. It sits outside of dignity entirely. He never told anyone. Not then. The 71st Infantry Division's logistics records, later recovered and archived at the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz, show that Carl's company of 180 men received exactly 22 pairs of replacement boots across the 3-month period spanning November 1941 through January 1942. 22 pairs.
For 180 menn.
Across a winter that the German supply system had not planned to survive. Carl pulls on his new American boot. The sole does not flex. Across the processing table, Sergeant Clifford Pruitt is moving down the line. Pruitt is 35 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the unhurried competence of a man who is very good at something that doesn't require drama. He hands out equipment the way a pharmacist fills prescriptions accurately, efficiently, without performance. Wool blankets folded in thirds. Mess kits nested in their cases. Canvas bags. Uniform sets pressed flat. He checks the size, reaches, passes it across, moves on. He does not make eye contact. Not from cruelty. Simply from the rhythm of a task he has completed several hundred times and intends to complete several hundred more. On Pruitt's far side, the processing line has brought in Otto Schell. Otto is 31, a sergeant, formerly of the Afrika Korps, Rommel's force in North Africa before Tunis fell in May and sent thousands of Germans into Allied captivity in a single afternoon. He has a wide face, a close-cropped beard that the processing staff told him he could keep, and the particular expression of a man who has decided in advance that whatever is about to happen will not impress him. He was not always this way. 3 years of watching the gap between what he was told and what was actually true had produced it methodically, one contradiction at a time. Pruitt hands Schell his mess kit. Otto turns it over. Once, twice. Sets it on the table in front of him with the careful movements of a man who doesn't fully trust his own hands. The kit is clean steel, factory fresh, 3 compartments, no dents. It smells of the machinery that made it. Otto had eaten from a dented tin shared between 4 men at El Alamein. Pruitt raises an eyebrow, moves on. At the far end of the room, near the exit corridor, a pile of boots sits against the wall. Carl notices them before the guard does. 14 pairs, stacked without particular care, worn but structurally intact. Leather uppers in serviceable condition, soles with real miles remaining. They have been set aside from the previous intake, displaced by the new issue that every incoming prisoner receives as standard. Then Pruitt's colleague, a younger guard moving through the room on some errand, reaches the pile. He does not stop. He does not look at it with any consideration. He draws back his boot and kicks the pile toward the waste bin by the far wall. It fans out across the concrete floor. Leather on concrete. 14 pairs. He keeps walking. He does not break stride. He does not look back. Carl goes completely still. He has done the arithmetic before the guard reaches the door. 22 pairs for 180 men across 3 months. That is what the Wehrmacht's logistics system managed to produce for one company in one winter on the Eastern Front. The boots scattered across the concrete floor of this processing room, discarded because the supply of new ones made keeping the old ones unnecessary, represent more usable leather than his entire company received in replacement issue across a quarter of a year. That is not a metaphor. That is arithmetic. Otto Schell has seen it too. He is looking at the scattered pile with an expression that has gone briefly past his performance of indifference into something rawer. He recovers it quickly, sets his jaw, looks back down at the table. Theater, he says quietly, not looking at Carl. For the new arrivals. Give the prisoners decent boots so they write home about it. Carl does not answer. He is still watching the pile. Those boots by the wall, he says. The ones being thrown away. Otto looks. A muscle moves in his jaw. He says nothing else. In 1943, American tanneries processed in excess of 450 million square feet of leather annually. The War Production Board's logistics report, filed in early 1944 and preserved in the National Archives in Washington, describes a supply chain so deep that the primary planning concern was not scarcity but distribution, moving material fast enough to prevent warehouse accumulation. The United States was not managing a shortage. It was managing an excess. Carl does not know this figure yet. He doesn't need it. The boot on his foot does not shift, does not compress, does not make any promise it cannot keep. He goes to bed that night expecting the bread to be different in the morning. It isn't. That is the first thing he cannot explain. The second week arrives without ceremony. Monday. Bread in the mess hall, white, soft, set out in baskets at the center of every table without explanation. Carl tears a piece and presses it between his fingers. The interior compresses and springs back like a cushion. He sets it down and watches the basket. Wednesday. A barely touched loaf disappears into the waste bin. A fresh one arrives from the kitchen before the basket is empty. Friday. The bread is fresh. He goes to bed on Friday evening and lies on his back in the steady electric light of the barracks and thinks about Munich. His mother had written in her last letter before his capture that the city now observes mandatory blackouts from 9 in the evening until dawn. Lights extinguished, curtains drawn. Not as a precaution but as a requirement, because the power grid cannot sustain full civilian load alongside wartime industrial demand, and the bombers come at night anyway, and darkness is the only answer a city has when it has run out of better ones. Here, the lights in the barracks burn until 9 o'clock. Nobody mentions it. Nobody thanks anyone for it. The lights burn because there is no reason not to burn them, and that absence of reason is its own kind of information. By the end of the second week, Carl has run out of alternative explanations. He stops waiting for the performance to end. He starts, instead, to pay a different kind of attention. The mess hall seats 60 men at a time across long wooden tables. Carl develops a habit. He arrives early enough to watch the room fill and late enough to watch the room empty. And in between he observes the mechanics of abundance operating without awareness of itself. Bread refilled before it runs out. Coffee poured without measuring. Orderlies clearing plates that still have food on them because the kitchen has already prepared the next meal and there is nowhere to put the surplus. He thinks about old Vetter. Vetter was the cobbler on his parents' street in Nuremberg. A small man, slightly stooped, with hands that knew leather the way a surgeon knows tissue, by texture, by resistance, by what it would and would not tolerate. Carl had watched him work as a boy, sitting on the wooden stool beside the repair bench while Vetter resoled his father's work shoes for the 4th time in 12 years. Vetter had been proud of that, specifically proud. He had said it the way craftsmen say things that matter to them, quietly, without flourish, as a statement of professional fact. Same pair, 12 years. For Sauls. Good leather doesn't need replacing, it needs attention. Carl looks at the bread basket. Vetter would not have had a word for this room. It is a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week when Carl comes back to the barracks early. He has left the mess hall before the final, serving a small errand, a form to collect from the camp office, and he comes through the barracks door into a room that should be empty for another 20 minutes. Otto Schell is at the far end. He is sitting on his footlocker with his mess kit held in both hands, not examining it, not turning it over with the analytical detachment he performs in company. Holding it the way you hold something when the performance has temporarily stopped and you have forgotten that someone might come in. His eyes are wet. Carl stops in the doorway. He has seen men break before. On the front, it announced itself with noise, shouting, shaking, the specific violence of a system overloading. This is not that. This is quieter. This is a man who has been holding something at arm's length for 3 weeks and has finally let it come close. Carl walks to his bunk. He does not look back. A long silence follows. Then the small sound of a mess kit being set down on wood. Then Otto's bunk creaking as he lies back, one arm across his face. the same posture he uses to perform indifference. Except Carl knows what indifference looks like on Otto Schell, and this is not it. This is a man who has arrived somewhere he did not intend to arrive and has not yet decided what to do about it. Neither of them speaks. Otto has spent 3 weeks telling anyone who would listen that the food is theater, the equipment is theater, the whole operation is a calculated display designed to produce a specific psychological effect in men who are supposed to go home and report that America is formidable. He has said this with the conviction of a man who needs to keep believing it. He is not believing it anymore. Carl tightens the corner of his blanket and says nothing. In the 4th week, a new transport arrives at Camp Edwards. Among the 42 new prisoners is a young soldier who has managed to keep a folded German propaganda leaflet inside the lining of his field jacket through 2 searches. He passes it around the barracks that evening with the furtive pride of a man who believes he is sharing something valuable. Carl reads it by the light of his bunk. The leaflet is well produced. Clean typeface. Authoritative tone. It describes American military capability as compromised by political division, a democracy too fractured by internal disagreement to sustain the unified will that total war demands. It describes American soldiers as poorly trained and inadequately led. It describes domestic American industrial output as overstated by a government desperate to project strength it does not possess. These are not absurd claims. Carl has enough education to recognize the architecture of effective propaganda. You build it from partial truths, documented realities, real tensions that exist in the record and can be cited. The apparatus knew how to work with what was available. But the leaflet works only if you have never touched the boots. It works if you have never sat in the mess hall on a Friday and watched fresh bread arrive in a basket without anyone acknowledging that this is remarkable. It works if the only information you have about America is what the apparatus chooses to give you, because inside that controlled environment the claims are plausible. There is nothing in your hands to contradict them. Carl looks down at his boots. He picks up the leaflet and places it in the waste bin beside his bunk. He begins writing home in November. The camp permits 1 letter per week, subject to review by American censors on the outgoing side and German security services on the receiving end. Carl writes within the established restrictions, no military information, no intelligence, nothing that could constitute a security risk. He describes the weather. Cold now, with wind off the bay, glazing the camp paths in the mornings. He mentions his health. Good, he is eating adequately. He notes that he has received appropriate clothing for the season. He closes the letter with 1 sentence. I have what I need here. I think you will understand what I mean by that. He seals it and hands it to the processing desk. 3 weeks later, his mother's reply arrives. She describes November in Munich. The cooking oil ration has been reduced again. Coal is increasingly difficult to obtain. Her neighbor, Mrs. Hartmann, has been walking to her job at the municipal office in shoes with wooden soles because real leather is unavailable at any price in the civilian market. She asks whether he is being treated decently. Carl looks at his boots before he picks up the pen. He writes, yes, I am being treated decently. The American censor reads it and passes it through. Expected. There is nothing operationally sensitive in the letter. The German Security Review on the receiving end reads it too. They pass it through. Carl sits with this for 3 days before he understands what it means. The German security apparatus is not careless. It is not inefficient. It reads correspondence from prisoners of war with the specific professional purpose of identifying material that should not reach the home front, material that could damage civilian morale, undermine confidence in the war effort, introduce doubt into a population being asked to sustain sacrifice at an increasingly severe level. They read his letter. They read, I have what I need. I think you will understand what I mean by that. And they passed it through. Either they did not understand what he meant, or they understood exactly what he meant and decided that suppressing it would cost more than releasing it. Carl thinks about the intelligence briefings that German High Command has received on American industrial capacity. He thinks about the numbers that exist in those reports: 450 million square feet of leather annually, 86,000 aircraft produced in 1943 alone, 2,754 ships launched in a single year, 12.3 billion rounds of small arms ammunition manufactured in 12 months. He thinks about what it would mean to possess those numbers and still be managing a war on the Eastern Front that has already consumed more than the original plan accounted for. The censors are not protecting a secret. They already know what they are doing carefully, professionally, with the quiet competence of men whose job has changed without anyone announcing the change, is managing the distance between what is known at the top and what can be safely acknowledged at the bottom. Not protection. Administration. Not a secret. Collapse. Being managed one past letter at a time. Carl sets down his pen. Outside, the lights are burning past 9 o'clock. The wind off the bay moves through the bare trees along the fence line and makes the sound that empty branches make in November dry, without resonance. The sound of things that have finished for the season. The bread will be fresh tomorrow. He knows this now the way he knows the sun will rise, not as a hope, not as an expectation built on a few days of evidence, but as a fact established by a supply chain so deep that the question of whether tomorrow's bread will be fresh has the same answer as the question of whether tomorrow will arrive. Winter arrives at Camp Edwards with the particular cold of coastal Massachusetts. Wet, penetrating, moving in off Cape Cod Bay and making the bare trees along the fence line stand stiff against gray November skies. German prisoners are issued wool-lined coats. Not repaired coats. Not redistributed from previous occupants. Not coats pulled from a reserve that was itself pulled from somewhere else. New coats, folded flat, tagged with size designations, smelling of the factory that produced them the way the boots smelled of the factory that produced them. Clifford Pruitt works down the line. He checks a tag. He looks at Carl. He reaches behind him and lifts a coat from the stack and passes it across without ceremony, the way you hand over something that is simply going to the person who needs it because there is more where that came from. He has distributed 412 coats since September. This one is no different from the others. That, Carl thinks, is precisely the point. He puts on the coat. The wool lining closes around his arms immediately. Not eventually. Immediately. Because it was cut to a size that corresponds to the body wearing it, and it closes properly at the wrists and chest, and the wool is thick enough that warmth is not a process, it is a condition. He stands in the distribution line and does not move for a moment. He is thinking about December 1941. He is thinking about the men of the 71st Infantry Division in the approach sector west of Moscow, when the temperature had dropped past -20 and the Wehrmacht supply system, designed for a campaign that was supposed to have ended in October, had produced no winter coats because no one in the planning apparatus had considered it necessary to order them. Because the planning apparatus had not considered failure. It had not built failure into its projections as a category worth preparing for. Carl had watched men wrap themselves in captured Soviet greatcoats, in requisitioned civilian blankets, in newspaper packed between uniform layers against wind that cut through standard Wehrmacht issue as though the fabric were theatrical, present for the appearance of clothing, not the function of it. He buttons the new coat from the bottom up. All the buttons are there, every one of them firmly attached. He steps out of the line. The third transport of the autumn arrives on a gray Tuesday morning. Carl watches the new prisoners come through from his position near the barracks entrance. 41 men, various units, mostly from the Italian theater. Most of them have the look, the compressed expression, the eyes that have processed enough contradiction to have temporarily suspended the machinery of firm belief. One of them does not. He is near the back of the line. Young, very young, Carl judges, watching the specific way youth carries itself even when it is trying to carry itself like something older. Shoulders set with deliberate straightness. Jaw held at an angle that announces the person wearing it has decided in advance how they intend to present themselves to whatever comes next. His name is Erwin Strasser. He is 19 years old. In the barracks, during the informal hour before lights out, Erwin speaks with the confidence of someone who has been given a complete explanation of the world and has not yet been given sufficient evidence to revise it. The Italian losses are tactical, not strategic. The Führer's planning for the Eastern situation contains dimensions not yet visible at the field level. American industrial output is significantly overstated. Germany is not losing. Germany is consolidating. There is a difference. He says these things with the specific fluency of a young man repeating something he has heard from sources he trusted, in a voice that made the explanation feel like fact. The older prisoners listen or don't. A card game in the corner continues without interruption. Otto Schell, lying on his bunk with an arm across his face, does not open his eyes. Karl looks at Erwin Strasser and recognizes something precise and specific. He is looking at himself. Not a metaphor or recreation of a man. Karl Brauer was approximately 3 years ago, before the Eastern Front, before the dissolved boot sole, before Camp Edwards and the bread that was fresh on Friday and the lights that burned past 9 and the 14 pairs of boots kicked toward a waste bin by a man who did not break his stride. Before the thumb against the sole that did not move. Erwin Strasser has not yet touched the boots. He has only heard the briefing about the boots. And inside the controlled information environment where the briefing was delivered, it was entirely coherent. Every piece of it fit together. Every claim supported the next one. You did not doubt it because nothing in your immediate environment contradicted it. Karl knows this condition from the inside. He thinks about saying something, about turning to Erwin and telling him, with the quiet authority of a man who has been here 3 months, that the framework does not survive contact with the mess hall bread basket, that it does not survive Pruitt moving down the distribution line without making eye contact because he is surrounded by so much supply that individual items have lost their specific gravity. He does not say anything. This decision is active, deliberate, based on something Karl has come to understand about this particular kind of knowledge. Cannot be given, can only be received. And it can only be received when the person is standing inside the evidence themselves, not hearing about it, not reading about it, not being told about it by someone trying to make a point. The evidence has to be in your hands, in your stomach, on your feet. Erwin Strasser will receive a pair of boots in the morning. Karl turns toward his bunk and says nothing. He decides to wait and see what the young man's face looks like after a week. That same evening, Karl leaves the barracks on a small errand. A form, collected from the administrative desk at the far end of the processing hall. On his way back, he passes through the main hall and he stops. The day's disposal pile is against the far wall. He crouches down. He picks up the nearest pair, turns them over, runs his thumb along the sole, a reflex now, something his hand does without instruction. The leather is worn at the heel, creased across the ball of the foot where the material has flexed thousands of times. The upper has a scuff on the left side that a good cobbler could treat in 20 minutes. The lacing hardware is intact. The toe box holds its shape. These boots have life remaining in them. He counts the pile carefully, the way he was trained to count things that matter, once and then again from the other direction. 14 pairs. He stays crouched beside the pile for a long time. He has been carrying this number since August. 22 pairs for 180 men across 3 months. That is what the Wehrmacht's logistics system managed to produce for one company in one winter on the Eastern Front. Now, crouching beside the pile with his hands on worn leather, the number stops being a number. It becomes a fact about the world. 14 pairs. One morning, he does the division, the comparison, the specific calculation of what it would have meant if those 22 pairs had arrived in a single day's disposal pile from a single processing facility in a country producing so much material that worn but serviceable boots had no place in the system except the waste bin. There is no drama in this moment. No score building underneath it. There is only a man crouching beside a pile of discarded boots in an empty processing hall in November 1943, doing arithmetic that has only one answer and has always had only one answer since the day he pressed his thumb into the sole and felt nothing give. Germany is not going to win this war. He has known this for weeks in the way you know things before you are willing to say them even to yourself, even in the privacy of your own thinking, because some conclusions carry weight that you have to be ready to hold before you let yourself hold them. He has known it in the bread basket and in Otto's eyes above the mess kit and in the censor who passed the letter through because passing it through cost less than stopping it. He knows it now completely, not because of any general's decision, not because of any battle lost or campaign collapsed, because of what a boot means inside 2 different supply systems, because of the distance between a sole that dissolves in November mud and a sole that does not move when you press your thumb into it with the full strength of your hand. He stands up, walks back to the barracks, says nothing to anyone. 1 week later, Karl watches Erwin Strasser's face. He finds him on a Thursday morning, standing at the barracks window. A supply truck is backing against the loading dock. Two workers are offloading crates. Standard morning delivery. Routine enough that most prisoners stopped registering it weeks ago, the way you stop hearing a sound that occurs at the same time every day until it becomes part of the ambient texture of the place. Erwin is watching the truck. Not with shock. Not with the wide eyes and shifting jaw of a system encountering something it was not built to process. This is something quieter and more irreversible. This is a young man rearranging a very large thing. Carl watches him for a moment and then looks away. There is nothing to add. The evidence has been making its argument since the morning Erwin Strasser received his boots, and the argument does not require assistance. It requires only time and the daily accumulation of ordinary American abundance pressing against a framework that was not built to withstand it. He understands, watching Erwin at the window, that he is not watching a defeat. He is watching an arrival. Karl Brauer returns to Germany in the spring of 1946. He is 31 years old. He takes a position coordinating logistics for the Allied reconstruction effort in Frankfurt, a job for which 3 years of watching the American supply system operate from the inside has prepared him in ways that a formal qualification never could. He holds the position for nearly 30 years. He is considered exceptionally good at it. He never speaks publicly about Camp Edwards. When Karl Brauer dies in the autumn of 1989, at the age of 74, his family clears his apartment in Frankfurt. Under the bed, in the space between the frame and the floor where the light does not reach, they find a single boot. American-made. Camp Edwards issue. The leather darkened with age but structurally intact, the sole still holding its shape after 46 years. The laces replaced once, then again, but the same boot. Kept through the reconstruction, through 3 decades of building something new from the wreckage of something that had overreached, kept through all of it and placed, without explanation, under a bed. His daughter holds it for a long time before she understands what it is. Otto Schell settles in Manitoba, Canada, in 1947. He does not explain his choice of destination to anyone. He works as a mechanic, then as a shop foreman, then retires in 1978. His neighbors describe him as quiet and reliable, a man who maintained things carefully and did not discard anything before its time. Erwin Strasser's post-war records are incomplete. His name appears in a repatriation manifest dated July 1946. After that, the file is empty. The war ends in May 1945. Between November 1943 and that morning, much is lost on every side, in numbers that still resist reduction to language, in cities and armies and individual lives that the 20th century has not finished accounting for. But the arithmetic was already complete. It had been complete since August, since a processing hall in Massachusetts, since a man pressed his thumb into a soul and felt nothing give and understood slowly, and then all at once, what that meant about the depth of the supply chain behind it. A nation that rations its materials is a nation that knows its limits. A nation that throws boots away has not yet found them. Germany fought with everything it had. It fought with genuine military achievement and genuine sacrifice and the specific ruthless efficiency of a system optimized for a kind of war it believed would end before the optimization had to be sustained. It improvised. It rationed. It redirected. It endured far beyond what the early projections suggested was possible. America fought with what it could spare. That distance, measured not in blood but in leather, in bread, in the indifference of a man who kicks a pile of working boots toward a trash bin without breaking his stride, was the distance between defeat and victory. It was not a distance that could be closed by doctrine or will or the quality of individual soldiers. It was a distance measured in tanneries and production capacity and the organizational depth of a nation that had built its logistics for a world where failure was a category worth preparing for. Karl Brauer understood all of this from a pile of discarded shoes. From a soul that would not move. From a boot that was just a boot, replaceable, available, ordinary, in a country that had so many of them it was throwing them away. He laces them in the morning light. He goes to breakfast. The bread is fresh.